60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome into another edition of the Buckeye Grove Instant Access Podcast, the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, here with Braden Moles and Keaton Maisano. We are at a famous campus establishment right now. Not a lot of places to record a podcast at the moment, so we're just making do as we can. Big news today. Ohio State has learned its fate in terms of college football playoff. They are number 2 going out to the Fiesta Bowl to take on Clemson. Let's just jump right into it. We'll start with you, Braden. Your thoughts on the news.
I mean, I think this certainly makes sense. Ohio State being the number 2, as I said last night, it certainly, with the way the committee has talked all season about how the difference between LSU and Ohio State being how Ohio State has been consistent on both sides of the ball. I think LSU finally showing that kind of consistency and Ohio State struggling, against Wisconsin in the first half. I think that certainly ended up being the deciding factor. So I think Ohio State fans will certainly be a little upset that the Buckeyes aren't number 1 playing in Atlanta. I think, if they wanted the number 1 seed, not to say they didn't want the number 1 seed, but, they should have had a strong performance, I think, against Wisconsin, specifically in the first half.
Yeah, I was not surprised by the committee putting LSU number 1. I think it was a little bit of a shock in the sense that OSU really didn't do anything to lose their spot. I mean, Wisconsin's a very good team. They were able to come back, outscore them 27-0 in the second half, but then fell because the committee deemed that LSU kind of put together some complete performances to end the season, especially with their defense playing well against Georgia, which had not had a very good offense all season. But I think if Ohio State is as good of a team as people have thought they have been this entire year, they have a chance to have a historic run. I mean, a stretch of 5 games in which they'd beat Penn State, then Michigan, then Wisconsin, a chance to beat Clemson, and then either Oklahoma or LSU in the championship game. That would be an impressive 5-game stretch, really cement a historically great team if they can pull that off.
Yeah, we heard a lot of discussion of, are they going to be 1? Are they going to be 2? I know Braden and we were in the same car coming back from Indianapolis, listening to all the national shows. There seemed to be a lot of momentum out there for LSU to be the 1 for whatever reason. I'm still not convinced that they necessarily have a defense. Don't use that game against UGA truly as a benchmark. Jake Fromm really, in my opinion, has regressed this year. They're without their number 1 receiver, Lawrence Cager. They were without their number 2 receiver for the first half because he keeps getting in fights. And then their number 3 receiver got hurt as well, Blaylock. And DeAndre Swift only had about 5 touches in the game because he's been banged up as well. So obviously not the same UGA team that has been highly ranked, even though I think that the ranking there has been suspect, and I think that there's been just this artificial inflation when it comes to the SEC. I mean, does it really matter at this point? No, the games are locked in. There's no relitigating it or anything, but, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of part of the issue you run into here is all season, Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson have kind of been the 3 top teams. Then there's a significant gap, and then you get to the rest of the teams in the country. So when you look at whether it be LSU kind of beating up on Georgia or Ohio State beating Wisconsin, it's difficult to really take away much from those games because the teams that won yesterday, even though Ohio State struggled in the first half, were so clearly better than the other teams on the field. So even when you're looking at Georgia and questioning whether or not their offense is suspect, which I agree with Kevin, I think Fromm has regressed, and I think it's difficult to really judge them against Georgia. And I think similarly with Wisconsin, I mean, I think they are a very good team as they have shown the rest of the season, beating Iowa and then obviously taking the axe away from Minnesota. So I think it's really difficult to judge these teams because they have been so above kind of their competition this season.
Yeah, I mean, when you're comparing 2 great teams, it's kind of like parsing hairs at this point because, I mean, LSU with the defense thing, I mean, they have made some improvements, but then you really don't know based on the competition they've played. I mean, with A&M and Georgia, really not the best offenses. And then Ohio State, I mean, playing a team twice in the same season is really difficult, especially when that team's had a lot of time to think about losing by 31 points, because Wisconsin's a very good football team. They were able to make the adjustments. So it's hard to compare schedules like this, especially with the Big Ten and the SEC. There's always debates about the SEC is just better, but then the Big Ten, I think, really made some strides, especially with Minnesota rising up, and just overall the conference is kind of becoming a little bit closer. But, I mean, with the great teams with LSU and Ohio State, I think the committee decided that the gap was close going into the conference championship games, and LSU just looked slightly more impressive against a higher-rated opponent in their eyes. So I think LSU got the nudge to number one.
What are your thoughts on just the committee process in general? We were over at the Woody when most of the telecast was on, so I'm only kind of hunting and pecking bits of information off of social media and whatnot. But when Rob Mullins got on, said that Georgia was considered for that 4 spot along with Oklahoma. I went to social media, that's Kevin_Noon on Twitter, and said that if UGA really got any consideration for that 4 spot, let me be the first to issue a largely symbolic vote of no confidence in this playoff committee and system. What your thoughts?
I mean, I think it was a fairly, I think the committee got it right. I'd say, I mean, the process has been, there have been some teams that were certainly kind of over and underranked this year. I mean, when you look at overranked, probably you're looking at Georgia, Auburn, Texas A&M, whenever they would show up in the top 25. And then you have kind of in the underrated, I mean, you had for weeks Baylor and Minnesota weren't really getting much respect from the committee. But I think, things eventually worked themselves out. I think, I do truly think that we ended up with the 4 best teams in college football. So it's, while you can kind of argue about the rank, where 1 through 4 should be ranked, I do think the committee got, maybe for it's been an issue in the past getting the best 4 teams in the playoffs, but I really think this is the year where they got everything right.
Well, this is the year that everything really fell into place for them, so there was really no drama. So by kind of talking about the Georgia being in contention for the 4 spot, they're trying to create their own drama there. I mean, if any 2-loss team had a chance to be in contention for that, you would probably elevate Oregon into that spot, considering that they had won their conference championship game, looked impressive against Utah. But I think Oklahoma was light years ahead of even the next competition. I mean, really easy for the committee. I think that they might run into the issue of maybe looking too much at recency, having a recency bias with this because of what LSU did in the last 2 games, kind of forgetting that their defense really did struggle when they played other opponents. I mean, against a hampered Tua, he was able to really light up LSU's defense. So, I mean, I think there's a weakness in LSU. I don't think they've put together enough of a body of work to really put that defensive concern behind them. But at the same time, I mean, I think they got the right 4 teams in, so it'll play itself out just because everyone's going to get to play each other.
Yeah, I agree that they got the right 4 in there. I think the question is, were they in the right order? Obviously, Oklahoma's where it needed to be, and then the debate was between the other 3 teams, your other 3 undefeated conference champions. The ACC, obviously not a strong conference outside of Clemson. And then, you have the SEC and the Big Ten, and here in Big Ten country, the SEC is overrated. In the South, everybody talks about the Big Ten being overrated. But we're sitting with a number 1 team that is, they played a couple of FCS opponents, and they're not getting dinged for doing that. And I think that that's pretty ridiculous. But we can get into that here on the other side of the break. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, and before we went to the break, talking about the unevenness of scheduling. You got 9 conference games in some leagues, 8 in others. Some you can play FCS teams. Hell, you can play 2 FCS teams. Others, you can't play them at all. I don't know at the end of the day if it really would have changed what we're looking at in terms of the 4 teams. But, speaking personally, I have a big problem with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because, I believe Ohio State is the first team to ever go to win 9 conference games, go undefeated in a single season. So, it is interesting that when you compare their resume to LSU, LSU probably had the best win of the season going at Alabama and winning, with Tua still playing. But I think when you look at the overall resume, I think Ohio State clearly had the better collection of overall wins, with two of their three non-conference opponents won their conferences, and the other, Cincinnati, lost by 4 points. So, when you look at obviously Ohio State did not play in the FCS team, so they had a very strong non-conference schedule. So when comparing that with LSU's, it is interesting to see how, even though Ohio State is that first team to ever go 9-0 in a conference season, they still didn't really get any sort of boost from that. So it's a serious question for the incoming Big Ten commissioner. So do you look at kind of scheduling those FCS teams if you're just looking for wins at this point? If the committee isn't really going to give you any sort of boost from that 9 season conference games.
Well, I'm sure Oregon wishes they had scheduled an FCS team instead of Auburn right now. But I think the FCS problem is really a problem, because I think the committee addresses that issue when it's convenient for them. In the past, Washington's been punished for scheduling weaker opponents in the non-conference, but then you have LSU schedules Northwestern State, and that's not even mentioned. I think there's an inconsistency with that, and I think that there needs to be a greater push for better competition in the non-conference, and especially in the conference play, I think everyone should have to be playing 9 conference games instead of having 4 non-conference games in some conferences and 3 in the others, because it really creates an uneven playing field in a sport that's already destined to be a little uneven with different conferences. So I think they just need to even the playing field as much as they possibly can.
Ryan Day, after the Big Ten championship game, definitely out there lobbying for his team to be number one. It was pretty obvious that he was disappointed when he spoke to us. Doing the best to just, I'm past that. It's time to focus on Clemson. Any takeaways from comments from Ryan today?
Yeah, I think he's been one to kind of push aside any praise given to him this year, but this really was the first time that he was really saying, look at this team, look at what we put together, we deserve to have that number 1 seed. That's even after, it was announced that Ohio State was number 2, he still wasn't backing away from saying that Ohio State should have been the number 1 seed. So it really was interesting. It really seems like, especially since the Michigan game, that he's really had a weight off his shoulders in terms of getting past this big stretch of games. Obviously now with 3 wins over 3 straight top 10 opponents. So I think it really seems like it's a weight off his chest having been through this stretch, and now that he has time to look back and reflect, he really thinks that what Ohio State has done over this season, with this 13-0 season, should have been deserving of the number 1 seed.
Well, if you're Ryan Day, you're probably asking yourself, what else could we have done that would have been better for us to get that number 1 seed? Unless they do a 59-0 that Ohio State did back in the championship run against Wisconsin, I really don't know how they would have kept that 1 seed. It almost seemed like the committee, after they saw the Georgia game, was kind of leaning towards putting LSU as number 1. And then really just going forward, I think this is kind of a blessing for Ohio State, because, getting the number 1 seed, you don't get an award for that. And historically, the number 1 seed does not perform very well in the playoffs, so maybe I'll work in Ohio State's favor if history repeats itself. But I think Ryan Day's done a great job of getting the team focused every single game this year, and I think that once you're in the playoff, this is when you're playing for it all, and I don't think that he'll have a problem getting the guys focused and ready to go for this game. It's just the competition is now heightened, so the games will be close.
Last one here, because our pizza came out a couple minutes ago. I'd like to eat it while it's still hot. None of us have really had a chance to watch Clemson at length. At least I haven't. I don't know about you guys. You guys are always in the press box with me, so I don't know when you would. Thoughts on the matchup itself? Short of us having the opportunity to really break things down, I know we had the chance to see large parts of the game against North Carolina. Really dumb 2-point conversion call. Definitely the play. I don't think they should have gone for 2 at that point anyway, because they had all the momentum. But, your thoughts on the matchup itself?
Yeah, like Kevin said, that game against North Carolina is the only one that given that we're busy for most of Saturdays, there's not been much time to really look back at Clemson and see what they've done. But, all things considered, they still seem to be that, they still have that pedigree of the defending national champions, and they have gotten better as the season's progressed. Trevor Lawrence was kind of a turnover machine early in the season. He's really been able to limit that as of late, and I think their defense has been as dominant as ever. So I think it's certain for Ohio State. Honestly, this may be an unpopular opinion. I think they would much rather play them in the semifinals than the finals, because if you have 2 to 3 weeks to prepare for them now versus just a couple of weeks if you're preparing for them in the championship game. So against a team like this that has so much playoff experience and just the short span of the playoffs life, just the last few years, I think it's going to be really big for Ohio State to have that extra time to prep. But my initial, I don't know if we're giving score predictions here, kind of what we, my initial thought is I would say Clemson by maybe a touchdown, because I think they really just have, not to say that Ohio State doesn't have a lot of leadership, but Clemson has guys that have been tested through these playoffs through the last few years, so I think they bring a lot of experience in that area, especially when Dabo Swinney.
Well, I think what you have here is the two most well-rounded teams in the country playing each other, and then in the other matchup you have the two best offenses almost going at it. So I think it's intriguing in that sense that you're going to have a well-rounded game over here where it could be defensive, it could be offensive, it could have a mixture of both. And I think Clemson's just a winning team, and if you want to be the champs, you have to knock off the champs. So I think it's fitting that if Ohio State wants to go for that crown, they're going to have to go through Clemson, and Dabo's going to have his guys ready to go. I think it will come down to how Jeff Hafley and the Ohio State secondary kind of get with and mess with Trevor Lawrence. If they can create some pressure, force him into some mistakes, get some short fields, Ohio State could really get an advantage on that part of it. Because Ohio State really historically doesn't throw picks with Justin Fields. I mean, he's done one this season, so really just maintaining the ball, not turning the ball over, I think is going to be the key in this game. So my initial prediction on that would probably be, I think Ohio State would edge it out by a touchdown. I'll go opposite of what Braden was saying, just my initial thoughts, because I trust Ohio State's rushing attack, and I really like how Ryan Day's not afraid to be aggressive in the big games. And I think when you're defending champ, there might be a sense to almost play a little bit more conservative when Ohio State's kind of the contender going after him.
And I guess I'm going to be the tiebreaker here at this point. I think that one of the major keys is going to be how well Ohio State can defend Justin Fields. I mean, he's going to have 3 weeks that, that sprained MCL should be mostly all the way there. He said after the game, I think he said 85 to 90% was where he was at. I think he was probably highballing a little bit. Certainly having that big brace didn't help him. But, we talked to Josh Myers as well on Sunday, and he said that, some of the situations were that the Wisconsin was just bringing more players than they could block, or even if it was like, they were sending 6 and they had 6 back just based on assignments. And, it's more than just simple math. I mean, it's simple math, but there's a little bit more to it. Ohio State certainly has had no success against Clemson through the years. I mean, obviously we remember the first time around and everything that happened there, and then Ohio State played them in the Orange Bowl, and then Ohio State got waxed 31-0 against against them in the Fiesta Bowl, which obviously was the last time that the Buckeyes had been in the playoff. Historically speaking, I think the Buckeyes might have their hands full, but I think there's just something special about this team having 3 weeks off after this gauntlet. I think they're going to come in recharged, refreshed. I think their minds are going to be in the right place. Not saying that they came in, flat or anything like that. I think you just come in exhausted. I like Ohio State here in my way too early non-binding prediction to win by, I don't know, let's say 4. So, 2 for Ohio State, 1 for Clemson. Everything's subject to change, once we have a chance to check things out and whatnot. And we hope you stay checking things out with us here at BuckeyeGrove.com, here on the BIA podcast. I want to thank Braden, thank Keaton. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, and we will talk to you soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.